Everybody loves the food in the cafeterias, right? Yes? Okay.
No, wait a second.
Oh.
He is in charge of the food program for our school system. We don't call it a food service, we call it a nutrition service because it's healthy and it's good for you. So you can shake his hand when he leaves and say thank you for all the good, nutritious food you serve.
Oh, thank you. I guess now we're going to go with the groundbreaking.
We're actually going to dig, put it in, and we're going to throw the dirt on the kids. I don't want you to throw any dirt on this pretty young lady right there. More everybody ready? All right, dig it in now.
Microphone on. I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7:10 p.m. First, we'll take a moment of silence and followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will have the coordinator call the roll.
Ms. Jackson.
Present.
Mr. Rollins.
Here.
Mr. Scrivano.
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Here.
Dr. Harner.
Here.
Mr. Connor.
Here.
Mrs. Powers.
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. I don't think we have any media students from Auburn here tonight, so we'll thank Vince for handling all of our media. Don't believe we have, we're going to go into a recognition now, and Mr. Dotson, take it away.
Good evening and thank you. Mondelez International hosted a clothing drive last month for Rockford Public Schools students, and more than 6,500 items were donated to the RPS Homeless Department. 2 school buses were required to transport the items into our facilities. Mondelez International in Loves Park hosted the drive, which was kicked off with Mondelez employee Jeremy Hissong. Mr. Hissong saw an interview with an RPS homeless student advocate on Channel 13 WREX about students still needing clothing and supplies necessary for school. He ran with the idea of a clothing drive to benefit RPS students with dozens of volunteers to collect and sort items. Alex Brewington, who oversees our social workers, said, Mr. Hissong and Mondelez International worked hard for our children, and she was moved by the energy and enthusiasm of the donors. Thank you, Mondelez International, for supporting Rockford Public Schools and its students. And let's give a round of applause for Mr. Hissong, who is here tonight to collect that award. I'd also like to mention that Alex Brewington is here this evening, and Kevin Anderson, who works in the homeless department, really did a great job of helping kick this effort off as well. And that is all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Great job. We have no cards this evening for public comment, so I will skip that section of our agenda item and open it up to any board members for comments at this time. Mr. Connor?
I just wanted to say thank you to all the Rockford Public Schools student, staff, and parents that helped with activities, whether it was local charities or down in Washington on the disasters. So thanks to all of you for taking the time and effort to help others.
Okay. Ms. McCulloch.
I'm going to take a minute to give a couple of reports. We don't have these as committee reports, but I just want to put under board member comments, kind of more like an update of what's happening. 2 of the committees that I'm sitting on, one is the school-based health center, and I know that board members received an update in their packets about what we've been doing. I think what I wanted to share was the enthusiasm of the committee that comes together, and not only the enthusiasm, but the makeup of the committee. We have the principals of the schools where the student-based health center will be most involved, Auburn, Kennedy, and McIntosh, working with the people from our communications department, with the people from Crusader, with people from all over to try to come up with a plan to get input from community, parents, family, students, as they move forward with this. I know board members were told about the fact that the bids have now gone out. In our comments, it talked about the fact that there was a $217,000 contribution from the Woodward Charitable Trust. What wasn't in there is that this week, we received $104,701 from the Community Foundation. And that's for the first year, and it's for medical and dental equipment, and the first year salary of a pediatric nurse practitioner, and hopefully there'll be another $83,000 next year. So there's wide community support. The committee's been meeting, well, at least monthly, and outside of the committee meeting with us, they've also been meeting separately with the principals. I've got a whole timeline if anybody's interested of all the dates. They've been at the schools at night to try to talk to the parents. They've sat down with the staff. They did surveys with the staff as well as the parents. They're having a hard time, not surprisingly, getting a lot of input from community, parents, and students. They did go to the scrimmage game at Auburn, trying to get people in the lobby there. There wasn't a lot of, actually, people stopped to talk, but nobody filled out the survey. So one of the ways they're going to reach out is there's a lot of the students and family members in those schools who use the Crusader Clinic, and when they come in for their regular services to present them with a survey. So I just wanted to give you an update. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take those on or off the floor. And we will meet again next month, and there's a lot of information. I've asked our president to put it on the agenda for our quarterly meeting because they would like to come in and give you a quick overview and let you, as board members, also give your input on a survey. So the other committee that I'm working with is the DLR Committee, and I wanted to give, I know there was an update to board members, but to kind of give you some perspective on what our expectation is going forward with this committee. So we've been meeting every third week. I wanted to share with you the members of that committee. The committee is a board. The board is put together. They've all been open meetings with agendas posted, and we've had some community members present. The two board members that are on there are myself and Dr. Harner. The two administrative members are Dr. Jarrett and Mr. Schmidt. The community members we have four, and it's Dr. Rudy Valdez, Tana Vettori, Lloyd Johnson, and Dennis Hareslak. And it's just a really good group of people because there's people with some past experience, where we've come from, where we're at now. Tana Vettori, I don't know if you recognize that, but she has worked with ShareFest. Dr. Valdez has been in our schools as well as working on committees in the district. And Lloyd Johnson is the president of the NAACP. And in fact, at our last meeting, we started to bring okay, there was a little slow going, and it took us a couple months to get where we need to be and to understand what our process is going to be. And this is what wasn't really well founded in our notes to the board, and that is the first couple months we've been trying to get together community members, stakeholders, teachers, students, everybody, to have a conversation so that we can get to a point where we identify what the ideal learning environment is. And I know that doesn't seem like it was part of what our goal was for this group, but the idea behind that is if we can identify what the ideal learning environment is going to be, and we're projecting that out 10 years, and then simultaneously the district with DLR is putting together a comprehensive evaluation list of all the schools, and they're assessing each building. They're looking at the conditions, they're looking at the educational adequacy, they're looking at the demographics in the building. So they're going to take, in January, hopefully we'll have these two pieces of information. Here's what, based on all our work in committee with all these different groups and stakeholders and educators and non-educators, here's what the ideal learning environment should be, here's what the environments that we have are. And then from there, so we're going to, as a committee, start to bring those two together and match the ideal with what we actually have. And then from there, we will layer in what some of our programs are, what our footprint, you know, what that footprint might look like. So we do have a process in mind, and we will meet again in January. And I forgot to add that we have 4 ad hoc members that I've added. Earl Dotson, so that the communication department is very involved. Ben Holmstrom, Lisa DeChera, and she's coming in out of Chicago, and she's helping us with some of the historic preservation piece, making sure that we're thinking about community groups and that. And then Paul Goddard is there, also as an ad hoc member, and he's vice president of the REA. So we want to make sure that that educational input is there. So at the end of the whole process, we're hopefully going to have a delivery model that we will bring to the board for recommendation, that it supports what we've already made a decision on, but we at least will bring something forward and we'll have further conversation. Board members, if you don't know, you are of course always welcome. We do meet on Wednesday morning at 9:30, and our next meeting, as I said, is January 15th. And so that ends that report.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other board member comments? I would just like to take this time during this special week of Thanksgiving to express the board's sincere thanks to all of our RPS staff and the volunteers who make such a difference in the learning opportunities for our students. And thank you so much for all you do every day. So, if there are no other comments, we will move on the consent items to that include the meeting minutes of November 12th, 2013, payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, contracts under $10,000, and air travel. The other consent items including the resolution to approve the 2013 tax levies, monthly investment report, financial results year-to-date for October. The memorandum for understanding robotics differentials has been pulled by administration. And the last consent item is the Freedom of Information Act log. Is there a motion and a second to approve those consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Mr. Rollins.
Number 8A.
8A. Mrs. Powers.
The accounts payable.
Okay. 7C. I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of consent items not pulled.
Ms. Jackson? Yes. Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
I'll take a motion at this time in a second to approve the consent item 7C, accounts payable.
So moved.
So moved.
Moved.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Connor. Discussion. Mrs. Powers.
So, excuse me, in this submission, there were quite a few requests for attendees to go to a conference, and we've got 14 people going to the NCAC. If somebody could please speak to that, because I think, and the dollar amounts vary, so I'm just questioning what the anticipated full expense will be for 14 people to be flying to Arizona for this conference, and so if somebody could just speak to the attendees and the expense.
Is that the operations stuff?
That's the National Career Academy Conference.
Oh, okay, okay.
That happened early November? No, late October.
Oh. Mr. Lewis, did you want to add something to that?
So the board approved the travel to the conference under purchase order some time ago. This is just you're approving the actual remittal to reimburse the employees for their
I see.
per diem.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion on accounts payable? If not, we'll take a roll call vote on the approval of 7C.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson? The motion passes unanimously.
Now I'll take a motion and a second to approve consent item 8A, which is the resolution to approve the 2013 tax levies.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Rollins, second by Mr. Connor. Discussion, Mr. Rollins.
I pulled this just so people know what we're doing here because there's been a lot of discussion about our levy for next year. And we had articulated the desire to keep our levies flat. So I just want to make sure that we're accurate in what we tell people that we're doing here. Under property tax cap legislation, we sort of levy against both existing property and then any potential new property which may or may not exist. And so what Mr. Lewis does is levy against the existing property and then create sort of a phantom levy against any potential new property because we don't know if that new property is going to exist or not, and we don't want to forego those revenues if the new property exists. So it's my understanding, and hopefully Mr. Lewis will correct me if I'm wrong, that the levy that's before us actually does keep the levy for the existing property flat year over year. We're going to levy exactly the same amount that we did last year against the existing property. There is a plug figure in this levy for any potential new property. If there is new property out there, we'll get those additional dollars. If it turns out there's no new property, we won't get those additional dollars. I do want to, just in connection with this, note that as part of the year-to-date financial results, which we just approved, one of the notes in there shows that we collected year-to-date this year $5.7 million less in real estate taxes than we did for the same period last year. That is in connection with the board's decision last year to reduce the levy. So last year we actually reduced the levy year over year. We collected $5.7 million less year-to-date this year than we did during the same period last year. And this year, going forward, we're just going to keep the levy the same under this levy resolution that is up for approval.
Any other questions or discussion? Now I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of consent item 8A, the resolution to approve the tax levy.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson? Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
We are now at the closed session consent agenda items, which include resolution adopting the hearing officer's report for the dismissal of a non-tenured teacher, the appointment of a 10-month assistant principal, and the HR organizational report and addendum, and the student discipline in which listed students are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal, and suspensions are affirmed. The following students are expelled for the remainder of this 2013-2014 school year: DLM 11, KKL 12, CD 15, TMK 20, KH 21. The following student is expelled for the remainder of this school year, 2013-2014, and held in abeyance contingent upon a conditional probationary agreement for the first semester of the 2014-2015 school year, that is student AMT 14. And the following students are held in abeyance contingent upon a conditional probationary agreement, TMB 13 and RM 19. And the following students have been granted a conditional probation agreement. They are students GT1, DC2, HLC3, AEH4, CRT5, JTB6, MDH7, JG8, CSW9, JH17, EPR18. Is there a motion and a second to approve the closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Dr. Harner. Are there any items that board members would like to have pulled for separate consideration? Ms. Jackson.
9, all, 10, all, 11, all.
Okay. So they've all been pulled for separate consideration. So I guess I now need to take a motion to approve items, I'll do these separately, 9A, B, and C. Yeah, that's what I meant. All as one group, including A, B, and C is what I meant to say, okay?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Rollins. No discussion, we'll have a roll call on 9, A, B, and C.
Dr. Harner,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Mrs. Powers,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson. No. Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 no.
Would you like me to do 10 and 11 separately or together? Okay. We'll do, I'll take a motion then to approve the student disciplines in section 10 and section 11.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
seconded by Dr. Harner. The coordinator call the roll on the approval of the student disciplines under items number 10 and 11.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Mrs. Powers,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson. No. Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Yes.
Dr. Harner.
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 no.
Thank you. I will now move to the next agenda item, which is Dr. Jarrett's superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Scrivano. Thanksgiving coming up, I wanted to highlight just an awesome example from one of our teachers at King Elementary School, Teresa Barch, and what she allowed me to participate in as a continuation of a tradition she and Dr. Willis started last year at King Elementary, where challenged the superintendent to match what her elementary class can come up with. And I'm going to get a good weightlifting workout in, because as of now, that one class has already accumulated 284 cans for the can drive. So I think it's a great example of how a teacher can connect with a group of students and really model giving to others in a time of need, and that's certainly a school that has plenty of students that have need of their own. So I'm really inspired by those students, and wanted to share that with the board and with the community, and hope to update you on what the final number is that those students come up with. I also want to extend my appreciation to the board and a large percentage of our administrative team for taking time to attend the annual Tri-Conference. I think the professional development opportunities were excellent, and learned a great deal meeting with the state superintendent with one session, great deal about assessment and evaluation with some of the new recommendations that are coming up with the session early on Friday morning, and some excellent challenging keynote speeches that really tie in with kind of how rapidly our educational future is coming forward. So it's great to have the opportunity to take part in that kind of an event, and was happy to see that it was so well attended by our leadership team and by our board. Thank you.
Ms. McCulloch, you may proceed with the Education Committee report.
Education Committee has not met since the board met last. We are scheduled to meet in this room on December 2nd at 5:30. The items on our agenda are a continuation of the discussion on the bilingual programming, charter schools, empowerment zone schools, and the report on virtual learning.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rollins, the Operations Committee report.
The Operations Committee also has not met since the last board meeting, and we are scheduled to meet in this room on Tuesday, December 3rd at 5:30.
Okay, thank you. We will move then to the action items, and the first action item tonight is the agreement with Rockford Arts Council, the Arts Infusion Grant that Dr. Wolf presented. Is there a motion and a second to approve the agreement with Rockford Area Arts Council Arts Infusion Grant?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussions? Mrs. Powers.
How will we keep track and ensure that these dollars are, allocated across all the schools? Is there an implementation plan to spend these dollars, or how, like I said, how do we ensure that one building doesn't aggressively pursue all the dollars to be able to incorporate art into their programs and other schools suffer? So how do we ensure we've got equity?
Mrs. Bradley went home ill, and I don't see Mr. Wolf in the audience, so I'm not sure if we have anyone that would be prepared to address that this evening, that specific question. Mr. Vosberg, do you have some familiarity with that?
You know, it's not a grant I oversee directly, but I have heard conversations. I'm trying to look through the contract language, but I do believe they've targeted just 2 middle schools based on need and math test scores. So I think it was Kennedy Middle School and Flynn Middle School, but I can check on that and get back to Ms. Powers.
Ms. Jackson?
And I had a similar question. It says that 11 schools were identified, and so I wanted to know what those schools were, and then how were they identified to receive these services. That was one question. And then, are we turning these monies over to this Rockford Area Arts Council? Because it looks like we're paying a management service fee for Sharon Nesbitt. She's getting 5% for billed teaching artist hours, which is $2,700. The remaining looks like it will be used up by the teaching artists that we bring in. So how are those monies being handled? Is there anyone able to speak to that, or no, not tonight?
Not tonight. I can get those answers for you.
Mr. Rollins, did you have a question? You had your light on earlier.
No, I mean, I was just going to point out that I believe that some of this has been discussed previously. This is up for the second reading, and some of it was discussed, and it's been discussed in some of the materials that have been previously presented to the board. And I do believe that Mr. Vosberg is correct that it's 2 middle schools and then 9 elementary schools. And I thought that we did see something. It's not before us tonight, but how those schools were selected. So I was just going to offer that. And the contract itself in Appendix C does specifically refer to the 11 schools, or at the 11 schools in the scope of the RAA grant.
Okay, any other questions or discussion? I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of our first action item, the agreement with Rockford Arts Council.
Ms. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson? Yes. Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scribano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch? Yes. Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Second item tonight is the $130,000 DCEO grant acceptance for McIntosh and Dennis. This was presented by Dr. Wolf. Is there a motion and a second to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor. Second by Dr. Harner. Any questions or discussion? Ms. Jackson.
I do have a question. It says the work was completed in 2012. So where do these monies go? Do they go back into a pot? It talks about the facilities plan. Who can speak to that?
That money will go back into Fund 20. That's where the original expenses came from.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of the DCEO grant acceptance.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scribano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Third action item tonight is the CICS Rockford Charter School RPS 205 pass-through agreement. I think this was Mrs. Hoadley that explained all this to us, so I'll take a motion and a second for the approval of that.
So moved.
Mr. Connor has made a motion, second by Ms. McCulloch. Any questions or discussion? Ms. Jackson, I don't think your light went on there. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I thought you did. Okay. Any questions, discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scribano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Final action item tonight is the $500,000 DCEO grant acceptance, CICS. Is there a motion and a second to approve that grant acceptance?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Ms. McCulloch. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of the $500,000 grant acceptance for CICS DCEO.
Mr. Scarano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch? Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson? Yes. Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Is there any additional new business for tonight? Mrs. Powers.
The last board meeting, we were presented with the draft of the audited financial results. When are comments due, or did I miss that deadline? I didn't see it in my notes, because it was just a draft.
Mr. Lewis?
Actually, the audit is complete. We have comprehensive annual financial report, which are a summary, which you received. Okay, well, that's the audited financial statement. But we also have the CAFR, which we can disseminate to the board. We've not done that already, Pete.
I guess what I'm getting at is there were some language issues in the draft.
And those were adjusted.
And so will we be getting a final then, or?
The adjustments that were made were in the management discussion and analysis, which is a part of the CAFR, so that those changes have been updated and are reflected in the CAFR document.
Okay, thank you.
Any other new business? Mr. Rollins?
Just raises a question. So I don't think we ever voted to accept the audit because it was just a draft. So doesn't that come back to us at some point for us to, for board action to accept the audit or approve the audit?
It was my understanding that it was presented and approved at the last meeting. Was that not the case, Pete? It didn't take a vote? Okay.
Okay. It was just a draft.
Okay, well, we'll bring that back before the board at the next regular meeting.
Okay. I think that's correct. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other new agenda items to be discussed tonight? Seeing none, I will take a motion to adjourn. Ms. Jackson.
Second.
Second by Mr. Connor. All those in favor, say aye. Anybody who wants to stay? No.